Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. For the past week, we have been live streaming Avowed, and I've been having an absolutely fantastic time with all of you. The game is really cool. Combat is a blast. I love how it's using Pillars of Eternity lore. So I'm looking forward to continuing that playthrough and finishing the game to see the full scope of what Obsidian has created. One of the complaints I've heard multiple times, both in the chat on my streams and in comments on my videos, is that the game is written poorly. And to be honest with you, to some degree, I do agree. I'm going to bring up some of those complaints in my review. And it's brought up a discussion about the last few games Obsidian has released, with many people basically claiming that they've never been the same since Chris Avellone left, and that his departure has significantly impacted the quality of writing in Obsidian games. I find this discussion to be interesting because, to be honest with you, I didn't feel that way prior to having this experience and seeing so many people saying the same thing. So I kind of want to unpack this and look at a little bit of the history of Obsidian to try to see if I feel the same way. You could just listen to this video. I don't plan to bounce around to footage of all the different games. I just want to kind of talk this through, and I'm definitely interested in hearing more perspective from all of you in regards to whether or not you believe the studio is still suffering from his absence. All right, now, before we get into it, let me just be clear. I'm a massive fan of Obsidian game. My first game of theirs was Knights of the Republic 2. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. And ever since then, I've pretty regularly played just about anything that they've come out with. So Chris or no Chris, I'm a big fan overall of the developer. All right, now with that being stated, let's go ahead and get into the discussion. So first and foremost, who is Chris Avellone? Well, he is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the greatest game developers of all time. In fact, if you care at all, it's worth noting IGN rated him as one of the top greatest game developers that the industry has ever seen. And there are a ton of different titles he's had a hand in that have gone on to become classics. Even before he started his work with Obsidian, he had had a role in games such as Fallout 2, Icewind Dale, and Planescape Torment as either a designer or writer or someone else who had a major impact on those games. So way before Obsidian was created, Chris was already someone who was well respected in the industry. But he left In Exile Studio and founded Obsidian Entertainment with a couple of other people. And in that studio, he served as either a lead designer or a lead writer or someone who had a significant influence on the narrative in several games that the studio released, right? So let's go ahead and go down the list. First and foremost, I've already mentioned KOTOR 2, which had the party member Kreia, who is unquestionably one of the most well-written party members of all time. Just an incredible example of a neutral Jedi. Really cool experiencing her content if you haven't played that game before. Without a shadow of a doubt, KOTOR 2 is a very well-written game, and it was successful for Obsidian as well. Now, next up is Neverwinter Nights 2, which I never played, but from my understanding, it's not considered to be as well written or as stable as some of Obsidian's other ventures. It sold well initially, but it had very poor word of mouth and very little replay value, again, because it had so many issues. And so consequently, the game ended up not doing all that well. And even the enhanced edition that Beamdog did wasn't a big seller either. It seems like people are kind of flat overall on this game. It is worth noting that Neverwinter Nights 2 had the Mask of the Betrayer DLC, which is highly regarded and considered by many people to be one of the greatest pieces of DLC for a game ever created. And part of that is definitely the writing. But the base game and the overall package, people do not seem to be high on at all. Next up is Alpha Protocol, which by all accounts is a game that is very well written and puts you in the role of a spy and places the player in some really interesting different situations. But unfortunately, it was also a game that was considered to be very unstable, kind of janky. And so consequently, many people who played it had a negative experience. But again, from the writing standpoint, it was considered to be quite strong. After that was Fallout New Vegas, absolutely considered to be by many people the best Fallout game that has been released, and certainly the best well-written one of the new options that we have had since Bethesda took the license over. I love this game. It does an incredible job with its different factions and placing you in a position to kind of decide the fate of the entire area. I would love to see a Fallout New Vegas 2 that would almost unquestionably sell like hotcakes. And once again, the writing is a big reason why. It's worth noting, however, that Fallout New Vegas was an extremely janky experience upon launch. And to be frank, it's janky even now. Very buggy game. Easy for you to end up in a situation where quests were broken or there were serious issues with your playthrough. So it was not at all a smooth experience for players, but it's one absolutely well worth experiencing, especially now with mods that help to smooth out the content even more. Next up after that is Pillars of Eternity, and this is a game where Obsidian seemed to finally kind of get things right, where it's the perfect marriage of incredible writing with very strong mechanics and a very stable experience for the player. Pillars of Eternity, by all accounts, had a very successful launch. If you've been on the channel for a while, you already know I am very high on this game. I did a full live stream playthrough on the channel. I love the Pillars of Eternity series. It's a big reason why I'm playing Avowed now. They did an absolutely fantastic job with this. Chris Avellone was a massive part of that. Durant's and Grieving Mother, both party members he had a major hand in writing, are the best written party members in the entire series thus far. So super happy with everything that happened in this game. And then finally, the last game that Chris Avellone had a part in that Obsidian released was Tyranny. And this is another game where I was really happy with it. Tyranny is incredibly unique, placing you in the role of the villain, essentially, but at the same time giving you the freedom to decide what kind of person you really are. It absolutely should be experienced by everybody who loves great stories in video games, and the writing is a massive part of that and really pulls you into the world. I don't think Avellone was a lead writer on this game, but I believe he helped with the narrative design for Tyranny. All right, and that wraps up all of the games Chris Avellone was involved in. So you can kind of see a consistent theme with all these different games, right? Extremely well written, great party members, great characters for you to introduce yourself to, but at the same time, very janky experiences and very uneven experiences as far as bugs and mechanical issues that players might be experiencing, right? Which is not on Chris. He is the one who's dealing with narrative design and writing and things of that nature. So those issues would most likely fall into other roles. But I feel like these issues are still worth noting because, in my personal opinion, the work that Obsidian has done since Chris Avellone has left has been significantly more stable compared to the work that was done before he left. But we're going to get into that in just a moment. Before we get into that, though, I know some of you are probably curious why Chris Avellone ended up leaving Obsidian Entertainment. I'm not going to go into that whole story. There's actually a bunch of different layers to it. And another reason I'm not going to go into it is because Chris has been very upfront and really laid out a lot of his feelings and a lot of the details regarding from his perspective why he ended up having to leave Obsidian, whereas Obsidian leadership has never done the same. So it kind of feels like we only have one side of the story, and based on that side, it seems to pretty much come down to Chris believes he was completely screwed over by Fergus, who is the CEO of Obsidian Entertainment. Screwed over bad, screwed over out of a lot of money, and consequently that relationship, the bridge is completely burnt, right? And he again has laid out in clear detail how he believes that Fergus treated him very poorly. Once again, Fergus has never done the same thing. Fergus has never said, this is why I did the things that I did with Chris. This is why it makes sense. And this is why he had to go. So who's right in this situation? I have no clue whatsoever, but I will say, being completely honest, I can't ever remember a developer speaking positively regarding Fergus whatsoever. Like, major publications that spoke positively about him, like IGN. IGN wrote a piece years ago saying he's the unsung hero of Blackout Entertainment and all that kind of stuff. I've never seen another developer, especially one that did some work with Obsidian, come out publicly and say, hey, working with Fergus is such a pleasure. He's a really great guy. I've never heard that whatsoever. Take that as you will. Moving on, I think it is worth looking over the games that Chris Avellone has done since moving away from Obsidian Entertainment, right? Because it brings up the question, would he be able to still produce fantastic content without them? So he's working basically as a freelancer now, and I'm just going to quickly go over the list of games that he's been involved in. All right, he was a writer for Torment Tides of Numenera. He was a writer on Prey. He was a narrative designer for Divinity Original Sin 2. He was a narrative designer for Pathfinder Kingmaker and Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. He was a writer for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and he did additional design work for Weird West, which is a game I thoroughly enjoyed, even though I know many of you may not be aware of it. That is an extremely strong list, right? And it really speaks to, hey, this is a person who still got it, who can still be a very, very positive impact on the gaming industry. It's pretty obvious he has been involved with some amazing titles that have released in the past 10 years. And honestly, anytime I see Chris Avallone's name associated with a game, I kind of automatically assume the writing is going to be of a certain quality. So his involvement is always welcome. Now, on the flip side, let's look at Obsidian. What has Obsidian been able to do since the time that Chris Avellone left the studio? Well, the first game they came out with was Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, which, in my opinion, by most accounts, is not written nearly as well as the first Pillars of Eternity game. The party members are not nearly as fleshed out. The main storyline is mediocre, to be honest with you. It's got a great premise, but it just doesn't carry it through or develop it, and certainly doesn't end it in a manner that I found to be satisfactory. The factions, I would venture to say, are written much better, though. They are much more fleshed out and interesting than they were in the first Pillars game. But still, overall, I would say that writing is an area where the second game doesn't live up to the first. However, the second game was an extremely stable experience, and mechanically, I would say that Deadfire is significantly better than Pillars of Eternity 1, a significant step forward. So by no means is this game a dud or clearly inferior to the first one. Then the next game was Outer Worlds. Now, this is another game where I would venture to say the writing doesn't really live up to previous Obsidian games. Outer Worlds, I've mentioned it before, it never felt like a complete game to me. Even though there were some interesting threads, especially with a couple of the party members, they dealt with things in a unique way. And so it was entertaining to go through the experience, but it just didn't feel like a fully fleshed out title. It felt like, hey, we included a bunch of core cool things here, but we're not really going to dig in and properly flesh out any of them. And I found that to be kind of irritating, to be frank. Supposedly, Outer Worlds 2 is going to be twice the size of the original, and so it's going to be very interesting to see if that feels much more like a full title that has Obsidian stamp on it. I'm definitely excited to play that game. After that came Grounded. I never played Grounded, but from everything I've heard, it's a fantastic experience. No question, this was very, very successful for Obsidian and a great look for the studio. It was pretty consistently in the top 10 most played games on Xbox Game Pass. And there's just no doubt in my mind that Obsidian is going to do a Grounded 2. The writing is supposed to be a major reason why it's so great. They do a fantastic job of basically making you feel like you're in a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids type of situation. Supposedly the ending could have been better, could have used some work, but otherwise the narrative was very, very strong. After that came Pentiment, which is, in my opinion, the most well-written game Obsidian has come out with since the time that Chris Avellone has left. The way they roped in history and mysteries and interactions between these different families and groups is absolutely incredible. Incredible. And that doesn't even speak to the art, the gameplay mechanics. There's a lot of interesting things going on in Pentiment. And just to be clear, that's coming from someone who did not like the game. I did not like the way this game handled mysteries, and I did not like that a lot of agency was taken away from the player in regards to decisions that the main character made. But the craftsmanship involved with this game is pretty much unquestionable. And I really, really think they did an incredible job of pulling it together, and the writing was a massive part of that. And then finally we come to Avowed, which I've already mentioned is a game that I do not believe is written as well as the previous Pillars of Eternity series. They don't do a good job of fleshing out most of the characters that you meet. We'll absolutely talk about this more in my review. The gameplay system is fantastic. And thus far, in my experience, I know some reviewers or players have said differently, but in my experience, the game has been very, very stable. In almost 40 hours, I've had one soft lock that made me restart the game. And then there was one time where quest marker was at a place where the person who I needed to turn in the quest with was not there. And so I had to reload the save, and then the person just popped up. So other than that, I've had no issues whatsoever. And for a game of this size, that definitely works for me. But definitely from a writing standpoint, this game should be better. So with all that being said, let's compare. With Chris Avellone, Obsidian created KOTOR 2, Neverwinter Nights 2, Alpha Protocol, Fallout New Vegas, Pillars of Eternity, and Tyranny. Without Chris Avellone, they have created Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, Outer Worlds, Grounded, Pentiment, and Avowed. In my personal opinion, yes, it's pretty obvious that the writing has not been as strong in the studio since Chris Avallone's absence. And this probably kind of speaks to they need to bring in more senior writing talent to help flesh out some of these stories that they are trying to do, which is something I kind of talked a little bit about before in my romance video, where I said it didn't make any sense the way Obsidian keeps avoiding romances. This, I believe, speaks to that. For whatever reason, Obsidian doesn't seem to be taking advantage of all the talent that's clearly available to help shore up some of their weaknesses. But I just got to be honest with you. In my opinion, if Outer Worlds 2 is written in the exact same way that the original Outer Worlds was, it's just not going to be very successful. I don't believe that format is going to carry over to an 150 hour game. Like, you need more. You need something of substance that makes people feel like they're going on a true epic quest with well-written and well-developed characters. This is what Obsidian has been known for, and I don't feel like they've gotten completely away from that identity at all. Again, Pillars of Eternity 2 is a game I love. I absolutely love and really feel like it has a lot of strong qualities to it. But from a writing standpoint, I already mentioned in my review, it definitely doesn't live up to the first Pillars of Eternity game. And I would love to see Obsidian get back to producing epic tales that have that same level of quality, especially when it comes to how they're dealing with companions. When you look at Deadfire, Outer Worlds, and even to a lesser degree Pentiment, and certainly Avowed, the way those games deal with companions and party members pales in comparison to Pillars of Eternity, Knights of the Old Republic 2, some of the other stuff that they've done. And so that's my personal perspective on it. I do think that Chris Avellon's loss has hurt them from a writing standpoint, and I really do believe they should put more effort in shoring up this area for some of their future releases that obviously they're going to want to have do very well. They're obviously coming out with Outer Worlds 2, and there's just no question in my mind they're going to do Fallout New Vegas 2. And obviously, I'm really hoping for a Pillars of Eternity 3. And I would hope that that game would have an incredible roster of party members who are well developed and have great stories for the player to pursue. Anyway, those are all my thoughts. I would love to hear from all of you and tell me, hey, am I wrong? Do you think I'm crazy? And pretty much nothing changed since Chris left? Or do you feel the exact opposite? And maybe you feel like there's no way that Obsidian would be able to make up for his loss, and that we just have to accept the way things are now, the way the games have been written. Definitely looking forward to the feedback. If you enjoyed this video, I would definitely appreciate you hitting the like button, subscribe to the channel. We're going to do more Avowed content, more content on Obsidian Entertainment Games, I'm sure, and more CRPG content in general, so stay locked in. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.